If you're in flood zone AE, you've probably got a lot of questions. I know I did when I bought a house in flood zone AE more than a decade ago. Like, hey, how is this going to impact my flood insurance cost? How is it going to impact my property value? What do I need to know? What are my bank requirements going to be if I'm buying a property in flood zone AE? Here's the good news for you that I did have more than a decade ago. In this video, you're going to find all the answers to those questions. So let's go ahead and let's dive into these different topics today on flood zone AE here in 2025. So today let's talk a little about, first of all, about flood insurance costs with flood zone AE in 2025 and what you need to know. Look, in order to understand this, we've got to go back and look at how flood zones or how really rates were built historically. Traditionally a flood zone may have made 70-80% of the rate up. Maybe you had an elevation certificate that could help you a little bit. However, here in 2025 with technology and artificial intelligence, there's so many different things that are using now in rates. Let's just talk about the National Flood Insurance Program first. How they determine rates. They look at things like the replacement cost of your building, like you can see right here behind me. Let's say that you had two buildings right here. One had a replacement cost of $250,000 and one had a replacement cost of $400,000. Even though you're not getting any more coverage with the National Flood Insurance Program, you could be paying significantly higher on your rate simply because your rebuild cost is higher. That's a significant change that happened in Risk Rating 2.0 back in 2021. Then there's distance to water. The closer you are to the water, the bigger the impact could have. Then there's the type of flooding. If we're talking about river flooding, flash flooding, coastal flooding, these are all things that can have a big impact on your rate. Then there's elevation, like you see right here, this house behind me, which is elevated kind of high up. Not all properties are. That could have another big impact on your flood insurance costs here in 2025. So that's something you want to pay attention to. Now, flood zones can still impact you a little bit on the private market, but flood zones are no longer used in the rating model with the National Flood Insurance Program. When it comes to flood insurance costs in AE, what you need to understand, there's really three coverages. You've got building coverage, contents coverage, and if you're taking out a private policy, you might have additional living expenses. Now, with these costs though, with what you need to understand is, of course, the more building coverage you select, probably the higher cost is going to be. Same thing with contents. Typically, we see if someone goes with zero contents versus getting $100,000 in contents, it might be a 30 or 40% impact. Look, you may not need $100,000 in contents. You may need more. Typically, what we recommend is about 50% of whatever you're covering the building for, cover your personal belongings. We're talking about things like appliances, potentially, furniture, those kinds of things. They add up. Then there's additional living expenses. Look, this isn't offered with the National Flood Insurance Program, so you don't have to worry about it. But private does offer it. So what exactly is this? Let's just say your house right here floods and you need a temporary place to live for 6 months. Exactly what it would pay for. That's exactly what we had happen to a customer in Nebraska about 7 years ago. She was the only one on her block that had a private policy and had a hotel paid for 6 months. And she talked about the financial and the emotional stress that took off her family during that very hard time of going through a flood claim. So that's some of the three coverages there when it comes to cost and how big of an impact it can have. When it comes to private flood insurance, they're going to use them different flood risk modeling. For example, they may use your flood risk score. You can find that by clicking in the description of this video. So that's flood insurance cost and what you need to know. Now let's talk about property value. See, I changed my flood zone and flood zone AE more than a decade ago, and it had a huge impact on property value. And it could be that you're in the wrong flood zone. We find that 40% of the time, some of these FEMA maps are out of date. And that could be the difference between someone being required to carry flood insurance and not requiring it when they go to buy your house. This could have a big impact. So you want to verify that flood zone, make sure it's right. See how close to water you are. Maybe you are elevated up here. Maybe you could potentially do a flood zone change like I did. Good news is we can help you with that. Then there's looking at bank requirements. What is your bank going to require here in flood zone AE in 2025? Typically your bank, if you're taking out a mortgage, is going to require one of two things. It's the lesser one. It's typically either the max amount coverage through the National Flood Insurance Program, which is $250,000, or your loan amount, whichever one's less. But you want to be cautious in covering your loan amount because it could default your policy to an actual cash value policy. This means depreciation and everything else is taken out. This means if you have a $250,000 claim on a property like this, you may only get $100,000 in checks to pay out on a total loss. So you want to be careful about that. You want to make sure to insure for 80% of your replacement costs. So a good number is you've got a $100,000 house, insure for at least $80,000. 200, at least 160. It's just a good thumb to go off there. So you want to pay attention to that when it comes to cost and coverages and things like this. Those are your bank requirements. Those are some of the flood insurance costs here in 2025 and changing your flood zone. So in the next video, we're going to talk about, is flood zone AE bad? Make sure to share, subscribe, and like the channel below. I'm Chris, the Flood Insurance Guru, and I look forward to speaking to you in our next video. Thank you.